What you see on your screen are scenes from Goma. Rebels of the March 23 movement or M23 armed group can be seen rallying in the city that they seized recently in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And here are some telltale signs of that seizure. This is the Goma International Airport, with damaged aircraft, gutted military trucks, guns, bulletproof vests, and rocket shells scattered all over. It is now under M23's control. So let's see what is the M23 and its demands. The M23 is a rebel group. It emerged from the rebel group CNDP, which laid down arms on 23rd March 2009 after a peace agreement reached that year stated that its soldiers would be integrated into the Congolese police and army, and CNDP's political wing would become an officially acknowledged party. In 2012, a faction within the CNDP denounced the poor implementation of the agreement and developed into a new rebel group called M23. Besides proclaiming to enforce the terms of the 2009 peace agreement, M23 claims to defend the interests of Congolese Tutsi and Kinyarwanda-speaking minorities. It says those minorities face threats from Hutu militias and the state has failed to protect them. It took joint military action by the FARDC or the Armed Forces of DRC and the United Nations to defeat M23 in 2013. Its fighters then fled to Rwanda and Uganda. Since then, barring some minor incidents, the M23 was dormant for almost a decade until late 2021, when it ramped up attacks again. So hostilities have continued unabated in this region for decades, forcing hundreds of thousands of people to flee their homes. Cut to 2025. In late January, the fighting escalated again. M23 fighters made a lightning advance in DR Congo's eastern region. They captured Goma, DR Congo's largest city of nearly 2 million people. The rebels then took another mining town in the South Kivu province and are now advancing towards Bukavu, the capital of South Kivu province, roughly 200 kilometers from Goma. As per United Nations estimates, nearly 3,000 people have been killed in the latest round of fighting between M23 and the armed forces of the DR Congo. Around 700,000 are estimated to have been displaced. The humanitarian situation is dire. The UN says more than 100 female prisoners were raped and then burnt alive during a jailbreak in Goma.
Depuis le 26 janvier,
Since January 26, nearly 3,000 people have been killed and 2,880 injured. The real figures are likely much higher. In Goma on January 27, 2 hospitals were bombed, killing and wounding many patients, including women and children. I'm horrified by the spread of sexual violence, which has been an appalling feature of this conflict for a long time.
par la propagation de violences sexuelles.
And there are fears the hostilities could expand into a wider regional war beyond the borders of DRC.
A intensifié son offensive.
If nothing is done, it's possible that the worst has yet to come for the people of the eastern DRC, but also beyond the DRC's borders.
So who leads M23? Sultani Makenga. He is the subject of many war crime allegations. The United States has imposed sanctions on him for recruiting child soldiers and for waging violent campaigns against civilians. The UN holds him responsible for killing and maiming and for sexual violence and abduction. So is there a way out of the conflict? Attempts are on to find a solution. An emergency summit in Tanzania's biggest city, Dar es Salaam, tried to defuse the crisis. It was the first ever summit of both Eastern and Southern African blocs. DR Congo is 2/3 the size of Western Europe. It is so vast that it is a member of both the East and Southern African blocs. The two groupings had so far been broadly divided over the conflict. The Eastern Bloc was closer to Rwanda's call for dialogue, and the southern countries backed Congo and were angry over the deaths of peacekeepers, experts and diplomats. What brought them together finally was deep concern in the African continent over the crisis and the standoff between Congo and neighboring Rwanda, which denies allegations that it is fueling the conflict with its own troops and weapons. At the summit, leaders urged all parties to hold direct talks, including with rebels.
The joint summit directed resumption of direct negotiations and dialogue with all state and non-state parties, military and non-military, including the M23, and under the framework of the Rwanda-Nairobi process.
So who are the main players in this conflict and what do they want? First and foremost, it is Congolese President Félix Tshisekedi. He wants to regain territory lost to the rebels. This includes the largest eastern town of Goma. He wants to stop them from seizing more territory. He blames Rwandan leader Paul Kagame for backing the M23 with weapons and troops. He says Rwanda is invading Congolese territory to loot its mineral wealth and for ousting his regime.
The attacks targeting civilians, forced displacement, and attacks on camps for internally displaced people are bringing to light the unacceptable brutality underpinned by unspeakable atrocities, including murders, rapes of at least 200 women, massacres, and forced recruitment of children into training centers in Watshuru and elsewhere. By actively supporting these armed groups, Rwanda bears a direct responsibility for these violations, exposing civilians to unimaginable suffering.
The case that Rwanda is supporting the M23 offensive is based on evidence presented in a UN report. It is broadly accepted by many African and Western governments who have demanded that Kagame withdraw his forces. But to Tshisekedi's frustration, none have responded to Kinshasa's calls for sanctions and other tough measures against Rwanda. Another key player is Rwanda's longtime leader Paul Kagame. He is the center of attention. He has a long history of military intervention inside DR Congo. It is linked to the aftermath of the 1994 Rwanda genocide. Rwanda does not admit to providing military support to the M23. Kagame says Rwanda's priority is to destroy an armed group formed by the Hutu genocide perpetrators who massacred Rwanda Tutsis and then fled to what is now eastern DR Congo. He accuses DR Congo's army of joining forces with them and others to slaughter Congolese Tutsis and also threaten Rwanda.
We categorically oppose the DRC attempts to portraying Rwanda as being responsible for the instability in eastern DRC. It is a well-known deflection tactic used to escape being accountable for the atrocities Kinshasa and its allied armed group are inflicting on their own citizens. What is clear, however, is the imminent threat the current situation poses to Rwanda. Following the fall of Goma, new evidence has come in light regarding an imminent large-scale attack against Rwanda.
At a diplomatic level, Rwanda wants confirmation of its narrative that the conflict is a Congolese problem and Kigali is simply defending its borders against the spillover of a civil war. Rwanda also denies UN evidence that it smuggles vast amounts of gold and other metals out of eastern DR Congo and sells them as its own. But fact is that access to DR Congo's mineral wealth has been a driver of the conflict in the region for decades. The third player is Burundi. It is a watchful neighbor that leans towards the DRC. Burundi borders both Rwanda and DRC. Relations between Rwanda and Burundi are hostile. Burundi has deployed thousands of soldiers in the east of DRC for years. They went to hunt down Burundian rebels but are now supporting Kinshasa's army in battles against the M23. Burundi and Rwanda accuse each other of trying to overthrow their respective governments. Burundi's president wrote this on social media. If Rwanda continues to make conquests, I know that war will even arrive in Burundi. One day, Kagame wants to come to Burundi. We are not going to accept that. The war will spread. Another player is Uganda, that plays both ways. Uganda is not directly involved, but it also has troops in eastern DR Congo. These troops are helping the Congolese government with a different security threat. which is hunting down militants with Ugandan origins who are connected to the Islamic State group. But Uganda's role is confusing as it's working with the Congolese while also allegedly providing at least complicit support to the M23. UN experts say Uganda has allowed M23 rebels to use Ugandan territory as a rear base and supply route. Kampala strongly denies this. Local residents say they saw Ugandan soldiers moving towards the conflict zone. This has heightened fears of a regional escalation. Like Rwanda, Uganda has entered eastern DR Congo in the past. It claimed to protect its borders then, but it is also accused of looting natural resources, especially gold. Uganda is expected to safeguard its economic interests while keeping an eye on the Rwandans. And lastly, South Africa. It has contributed most of the troops to a southern African regional force that fights alongside the Congolese army and has suffered heavy losses. South Africa made headlines for a bitter spat between Kigali and Johannesburg. The South Africans blamed the deaths of 14 of their soldiers on the Rwandan Defense Forces, which President Cyril Ramaphosa disparagingly referred to as the RDF militia. His defense minister claimed he had warned Kagame that any further shooting would be taken as a declaration of war. Kagame called the account of their conversation a lie. He called the South Africans a belligerent force that must leave DRC. So is a resolution of the conflict likely? Some fear a repeat of the two wars that engulfed the region in the late 1990s. It drew in 9 different countries and reportedly led to millions of deaths. Military action cannot resolve the conflict. A political solution must be found. For now, it is important to de-escalate and avert the looming threat of a third Congo war. That's all in this edition of Connecting the Dots. We'll see you in the next episode with more raging issues. Until then, it's a goodbye from all of us in the Delhi newsroom. This is Munmun Bhattacharya signing off. Take care and stay safe.